We ask officers to stand between order and chaos, but when they're abandoned by the very system they serve, the consequences don't stop with them. They reach into our homes, our families, and the future of this country. Today I'm joined by Jason Harris, a man who has spent a lifetime on the front lines, from the United States Army to 26 years in law enforcement, including K-9 operations and service as a task force officer with the U.S. Marshals. He's here to talk about moral injury, organizational betrayal, and what it really costs to hold the line. This is Extreme Sensibility. Well, Jason, thank you for joining us today on this episode. Really excited about the direction we're going to go, the things we're going to discuss. I think what you're working on right now is extremely important and is a reflection of our society, some of the challenges that we've got in that in general. So just to kind of start this going, we're going to be discussing today, obviously, moral injury, organizational betrayal, how faith, family, and the future, how that ties into the future of law enforcement and our society as well, with the individual and the agencies, et cetera. And basically, the effects of what happens when those who are on the front line, who are our guys and gals out there, feel like they're no longer supported. Right. And so you're doing some important work on that, and excited to kind of explore this with you today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
So let's start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born in California, but grew up here in Arkansas. Kind of, not from a rich household, anything like that. Grew up in a trailer park, but knew when I turned 18, I think my mom, we were single family. I went to the military, the Army for 4 years, became a Cav Scout. Came home, was really just invested in that. I loved finding that needle in the haystack. Right. I love getting out and being the boots on the ground and that discipline and the teamwork that came with that. Right. So I joined my law enforcement agency in 2000 and spent, did my time on patrol. Did 14 years as a K-9 officer, and the last 8 years I have spent being a task force officer with the United States Marshals Service.
Cool. Yeah. Well, you talk about your military service. Obviously, a lot of law enforcement starts out military, right, transfers over. You mentioned, in your Cav Scout days, some of the techniques and skills that you learned with that, finding that needle in the haystack. In doing that, what were some of the other things that you brought over? I know discipline's one of them, right? Kind of the team effort that goes into military and law enforcement. But in getting out in the real world, getting out on patrol, what are some of the other things?
Yeah, it's definitely, you have to have a mental mindset. Mm-hmm. You're definitely bringing, you had the upbringing in church. I went away from that for a while, but you still have morals, right? As people, I'm still an American. I love this country. And you have to take those morals and your beliefs, and whether in the military or as a uniformed officer, you're going to put that
to test.
Those go together. Yeah. I'm going to apply that badge and that uniform with my morals, and sometimes that doesn't mix. Right. Sometimes those organizations have different values. They see different things. They want you to react to the public in a different manner that goes against your values, goes against your morals, or it could be vice versa. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to have that mindset of wanting to, and you're dealing with people's problems every day. Right. You got your own problems at home.
You're carrying a double load. Yeah. Well, the cool thing, my grandfather actually, he was with state police and was one of the first K-9 guys as well. Kind of brought that in to Arkansas. So K-9 special. Yeah. You got a partner there that doesn't have to go by our compasses or our pressure. Exactly. They're as real as it gets.
Yeah.
Kind of, how did your canine partner sometimes approach things or cause you to approach things differently?
Sometimes it's sad to say, but I found faith more in my canine partner than I did some other partners on the street. Some more human partners. I knew when I popped that door and it was time to go to work, he was going to be right beside me.
Right.
I think today, we see, a lot of that decay because of social media, because of the news. Mm-hmm. People are afraid to act. They're afraid to police anymore.
Right.
So yeah, but having that dog, you knew what you had.
You knew what you were getting.
Yeah, I trained him. I'd seen him work. He had no training when I got him. So everything that was invested in him, I knew his capabilities, his limits.
Right.
Just like the military when they invested in me.
Right.
They're going to push you to a point, and we all break.
Yeah. You got to find where it lies.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's beyond what you perceive initially.
Yeah.
But you got to find that point. Yeah. The canine units have always fascinated me, both military and, in law enforcement, just that partnership. I've gotten the ability to, or the privilege to operate with some really amazing dogs in the field, as far as hunting. And when you've got a dog dialed in, when you've got a partner like that, just like you said, you don't have to question their loyalty. Mm-mm. And they're doing what they want to do as well. They're performing where they're designed to perform. Yeah. And just see that all click is pretty powerful.
Yeah, and for the public, did so many demonstrations at schools and church events, and you have the public chime in that we had his bulletproof vest donated to us.
Yeah,
and when I first got on canine, that wasn't a thing.
Right.
You were willing to sacrifice your dog if you had to. Mm-hmm. You didn't want to.
Right.
But when those vests came around, and you really, people got a lot of support and steam.
Right.
And caring for those officers,
and even and we get into the psychology involved with dealing with trauma and dealing with the day-to-day pressures. I know what I get from my pets, and you've got a partner and a pet. You got someone that's there to listen.
Yeah,
they might not be able to respond, talking to you, but they can pick up on your energy.
Well, and mine, he was. We made Officer of the Year. He was the first canine in our agency to be recognized as Canine of the Year.
Right.
And that was a privilege. I had him for 8 years, and then out working him one day, had a tumor on his spleen that the vet had missed and killed over right in front of me.
Oh, good.
Had to carry him back to my car, load him up, take him to the vet, and a couple weeks later, had to make that decision. And like you said, this is an animal that people, it's just a dog, and I know there's a bunch of dog lovers out there,
right,
but was willing to sacrifice himself for me.
Without question.
Without question.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about where you're at right now. Yeah. So we've mentioned, moral injury, organizational betrayal. That's an important topic now in law enforcement and in the military. So let's talk about how you ended up where you're at and what you're working on.
Yeah, so it's been a blessing. It took me a minute to get here. I was in June 24th of 2024. We were doing an federal operation called North Star. It was a nationwide operation put on by the U.S. Marshals Service. Had a simple fall, broke my shoulder, which ended up being a full rotator cuff tear, full upper bicep tear. The next day, a guy that a suspect I'd looked for probably about a year and a half, came on our radar. And we thought, we're going to go ahead and put him in the operation. We know where he's at. He had a violent history of murder. He's not, at the Marshals, we're not there to serve misdemeanor traffic warrants.
Right.
We're going to people that, we talked about that needle in the haystack, they don't want to be found. Mm-hmm. And so went and located him that day and ended up in a 4-hour shootout. That a couple of my team members were struck. I was a team leader that day, and to go through that trauma, not to say that every officer hasn't seen something in their lives, but I can tell you, coming up as an officer, you're told to suppress it. Mm-hmm. You can shove it, find that place and put it away. That's the old school way. And now we have wellness. that has stepped in. But, of all the times I've literally seen people take their own lives in front of me that was suppressed. Yeah. And you go home and your family wants to talk about those things, but you have to give them the Disneyland version
of it. Yeah. You're protecting them.
Yeah. And so for a year and a half, my shoulder's broken. My wife travels. I'm sitting on the couch. I can't drive because it's my right arm. So I can't go. I knew something wasn't right. Of all the thousands of warrants we served, you always have an operation plan. And that day, A, B, and C didn't work. 4 hours later, you're not even running an operation plan. You're in survival mode.
Yeah, and just so, this made the news, obviously. This was a big deal. Yeah. Full auto fire. Yeah.
He had weapons stacked up at the door, full auto AR.
And went on for 4 hours.
Yeah, 4 hours.
It was sustained serious
gunfight. Yeah. And when you talk about public perception of that, when that fight started, everybody wanted to come out and get on their phones. Mm-hmm. And so you're trying to handle business up front and trying to clear the public out from behind you.
Right.
And so we had to wait on other authorities to come back. And I think they set up a perimeter was probably about a half a mile, because when you think about AR-15.
Yeah, 5.56 zipping.
Yeah.
It'll travel.
Yeah. And, but people, they want to see that. But they don't understand. I have to change directions. Now, not only am I focused on my target, and my guys taking rounds.
Right.
I've got you behind me.
Yeah, exactly. Complicates things.
Yeah. And so when people think about an officer's mind or an agent's mind or an operator's mind, SWAT team, there's a lot that goes in to just, you were just there to handle that business. Mm-hmm. I had a lot more than that going on.
A whole lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so going through all that with your injury, with that episode, with all the other things that led up to that as well that you carried, right. You had a realization.
Yeah. So, when I'll tell you, here's one of the ones when we talk about institutional or organizational betrayal, and you talk about a moral injury. So out of that gunfight, I was diagnosed with PTSD. Mm-hmm. I understand it now as not such a disorder, but more of PTSI. It's an injury.
Yes.
And you learn to live with it and focus on that. What I had a hard time with was moral injury and organizational betrayal. In the middle of that gunfight, about an hour into it, I received a phone call that said, "Have you fired a round yet?" And I said, "Not yet." But in the back of my mind, you can think how that I switched gears from, I'm involved in an action here, but my organization is worried about the reaction.
Exactly. They're already starting to calculate.
So now you're really piling on pressure. Yeah, I need to take this shot if I can. We have every right. Deadly force is justified. Mm-hmm. We've exchanged 600 rounds with this guy. We're justified. But the scrutiny, what am I going to face when I come back? So not only did I have the public, I've got them cleared out. I've got my team. We're back in the fight. And then you receive a phone call. And that's where that organizational betrayal comes in, is you feel, man, what if I make the wrong shot?
Exactly.
It's not like the military. I've got people behind this guy. Mm-hmm. Our police, your shot has to count.
Right.
You had to have that visible line of sight to take that shot.
Right.
And so it ate me up right there on the spot.
Yeah. And that further complicates things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that in observing, what law enforcement's going through, right now on TV, talking to my buddies that are in it, talking to you, when you have those split-second decisions that need to be made for your safety or the public safety, and you have to stop and question whether or not your agency is going to be behind you or they're going to hang you out to dry.
Yeah.
I mean, the weight that has to carry. And what if you do the hesitation? How does that ripple out? How does that carry through?
Yeah, you've got your team.
Yeah.
You've got people counting on you.
So you end up, just from, knowing some of my career guys, what they've seen, what they've been through, there's a group that they just kind of give up. They're like,
what's my purpose? What's my hope?
What am I doing here?
Am I a good cop anymore?
Right. And it's that day-to-day battle, that day-to-day wait, and that degradation of why you entered in the first place.
Yeah. And that's why you see retention failing. Officers retiring early.
Right.
Recruitment is on a downward,
Scary stuff.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit, to be honest with you, I was fairly familiar with organizational or agency betrayal.
Yeah.
That was a topic that I understood to some degree, but the moral injury component of it was something that I was a little bit less, honestly, I had never heard that term.
Right.
It makes sense to me, but I hadn't heard that term. And so you've kind of hit on it a little bit, but those seem to be the two focal points right now of what you're doing. And if you can just kind of talk about kind of how you were approached, you went through all this, right. You recognized, hey, we got a problem here. Right. I'm living this. I think your wife kind of gave you the reality slap that you needed that, hey, we've got an issue here and we got to deal with this. And then you went through your, counseling with that,
right.
Looking at getting out of the agency, retiring out, kind of what happened after that point.
Yeah. Well, so my moral injury, I went to a conference here recently in New Orleans, and I had a clinician reach out to me wanting to know what moral injury was. She had heard about it, but she called it spiritual injury. And could not really find a whole lot about it. It's something that is really between 2022, 2023 has really come around. And the way I understand it is organizational betrayal and moral injury really are siblings. They're brother and sister or brother and brother. They go together hand in hand.
Right.
For me, I say I was heartbroken that day after the shooting because of the way my agency acted toward me. I realize now it was moral injury. When we walked through that town, we had to go back and have our interviews. FBI, ATF, state police is there. We go to a high school, and I look around the room, and as task force officers, we're all from different agencies brought to the, sworn in under the marshals to go out and do what we do, find these targets, find these needles.
Right.
And when I walked into that room, I saw everyone's chief. Everybody had drove there 3 or 4 hours to be with their people, and I was alone. And, and not even that, when I went back to my agency, quiet ride home, nobody's called me. This is the other part of that. When I went back to my agency, we had called for we needed more rounds that day. And my team on the organizational side, not the federal side, had said, hey, they're calling for extra rounds. We're going to go take them some rounds. Now, could they have got to us? No. The perimeter was so big, you could not have gotten me rounds. But they were told to stand down or they'd face reprimands for leaving the office because the organization did not want them involved.
Right.
For me, it would have been, hey, you couldn't get those rounds to me, but had I walked out and had a peer there to support me, to say the agency sent someone to you and to stand by me because I've got to now go through these interviews. I've got to go back right now and give an interview of what happened over the last 4 hours. That's what started changing my focus. And that's when I realized I had a moral injury. I had an organizational betrayal. And so when I went to this conference and really started learning on that, I took the ball and started running with it.
Yeah. And so then the agency reached out to you and said, hey, Jason, I know you're looking at retirement, but we've recognized this as an issue.
Yeah. And I think what happened is a lot of agencies around the nation now have brought in retired officers realizing, but as civilians and part-time, realizing that all that knowledge is leaving early. I'm taking an early retirement. But in that brokenness, my chief reached out to me and put me into a great program, which was a physical therapy program for first responders only. So when I was losing purpose, when you're facing these diagnoses, he was giving me purpose back.
Right.
I then found out later he had wrote me up for a congressional badge of bravery. So that turns around and you're like, man, I'm not, when it was so silent from my organization for for this year, for the 6-7 months, they're investing me in again.
Right.
A couple months ago, they asked me to come back and do a peer support class. And I thought, what's really, you guys know I'm leaving in October. What's going on? And then they send me to New Orleans. But they approached me and say, Jason, we need to bring back our guys with that experience. It's not a time to suppress these problems anymore. we want you to come back and invest part-time.
Right.
And these guys who are involved in shootings. And what I realized going to these things was, it's not these conferences. You understand, for these officers and agents, it's financial issues at home. You have female officers on the street that have miscarriages. Mm-hmm. People go through divorces, financial, they lose loved ones. It is deeper than them just having to take a life on the street.
Right.
If they ever have to in their career. Mm-hmm. There's so much going on there that I don't think the general public realizes.
Right. And that's one thing that I agree. The general public doesn't realize, and in some ways doesn't have the capacity. Mm-hmm. That's the other thing, to realize that a law enforcement officer is carrying all the weight that we do as average citizens.
Right.
Family, marriage, finance, everything else that we battle, plus what they're experiencing in dealing with their job that is so far beyond what we can understand working in an office, working, in a controlled environment.
Right.
And the potential, while not everybody experiences the trauma,
right,
there's always that potential. And with that potential, there is a level of stress. Every day you walk out and you suit up and you hop in your car and you roll out, there is always that potential at an elevated level than what anyone else is going to experience in their day-to-day operations. So that in itself just carries an extra weight, and I'm extraordinarily impressed with the men and women who continue to do this, especially in the environment that we've got now.
Right. And we had, it's a bad rap. We've had those bad apples, but you cannot show me an organization, not even take police out of it, fire department, corporations that do not deal with betrayal.
Yeah. Well, this is a good, I like the way we're heading right now, because, one of the things that I've gotten to see, we're both about the same age.
Yes, sir.
We've gotten to kind of see a shift, from when I was a kid, you wanted to be a fireman, you wanted to be a policeman. It was celebrated,
right?
Doctor, teacher, all of those things. But law enforcement had a special level of respect and fear as well. I think respect and fear roll right hand to hand.
Agreed.
And it was something that people had pride in. They wanted to be that. I know we've had some societal and cultural changes that have gone on over the past 30 years.
Right.
And just wanted, from your opinion, kind of what have you seen from the time that you started in to where we're at now, both from a cultural points, that we've seen some major shifts occur, to just kind of an overall perception.
Right. Well, when you think about back in 2000, when I applied, there was probably 1,000 others that applied with me. Like you talked about, there was that respect that people wanted to do that job. You had post 9/11. I remember strangers coming up, they want to buy you dinner. They want to buy you lunch. And we weren't even there physically involved in that, but just because you were law enforcement, just because you were a first responder, they wanted to show their gratitude for you. And then in 2014, we have the Ferguson Hands Up, and you start to see that decline in the public's perception of law enforcement. And granted, there's bad apples in every group.
Right.
There's not, you move on to George Floyd. I'm an officer. I did not agree with that at all. I don't agree with that. That's against, when we talk about morals, but what you see in society start looking at is that decline was there.
Right.
And so then when you look at recruitment over the last few years, where you're not recruiting, you don't have 1,000 applicants, you got 300.
Right.
And you're running academies of 9 to 10 because that's the best you can bid. Get off that. And they're having to raise the age, they had to raise the age requirements to we had people that were 60 and 70 applying.
Wow.
When it used to be 37 years old was your top out. Mm-hmm. So now we're finally getting recruitment back that's going back down. So we're seeing a little shift there.
Do you think that, that the recruitment, the fact that we're not able to fill the ranks or y'all aren't able to fill the ranks is why you're seeing the administration kind of waking up to what is the problem here?
Yeah.
Because now it's getting serious. Now it's their ability to run a department.
Right.
And they're being held accountable to some level where they've been able to drift around for the past 15 years, because we've had enough people to kind of tie it together, and now it's hitting a critical state. Right. I mean, do you see that as being the big push that they're having to dig in and be realistic about what are our problems? Because we hadn't seen it up until this point, at least from a civilian's perspective.
Right. Well, and you look at leadership, that for leadership to change, it's going to take that individual to change. It's going to have to, are you going to be political? Are you going to back your officers? Are you going to have fairness across the board? Are you going to, I've seen instances where there are so many closed doors investigations when it's involving an officer, and the young officers these days, they want that open door communication. Mm-hmm. They can accept the punishment or they can accept the criticism. It's the silence that burns them out.
Right.
And you have the leadership, like from my age, from my group and before me, that's still in place, that you suppress it.
Yeah.
We don't want to hear it. We don't want to talk about it. You were involved in a shooting. We're going to go ahead and release it to the news, but we're not going to tell you we're about to do it. And how does that officer feel sitting at the couch at home right now?
Well, you kind of brought up, there are bad apples, and we have that in every field. Yes. I mean, we're people. People are a diverse mix. There's good, bad, and in the middle. Yeah. But this perception of bad cops, it seems like the media picks and chooses to drive this. Right. I mean, where do you see this? I mean, it's not. Every cop's not bad. No. It seems like they're persecuted.
If I rode the media shirt tail, then the Dr. Kevorkians, I'd protest every hospital. Right? Mm-hmm. I'd have to assume every doctor's bad. He's assisting people in suicide.
Right.
If I looked at the teachers who had affairs with their students in school, but I'm still sending my kid to that school, there's no protest there. There's bad apples there. We still, and for some kids, that's their meal a day.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's their food a day. So when you think about that, what are you really protesting? Mm-hmm. You're protesting an individual, but you're blaming a whole culture.
Exactly.
A whole community of officers, of law enforcement out of one bad apple. And you've told me you've never experienced that one bad apple in society outside of law enforcement.
Right.
I find it hard to believe.
Yeah, and that's the danger that I see in this. Obviously, when we have issues, we need to address them.
Right.
You get a bad apple, take a look at that bad apple.
Yeah.
See, is it just that individual? Or is there a systemic issue that led to that?
Right.
It's okay to analyze, but to, punish in the public's eye, an entire organization because of one individual's actions is not fair. And that kind of brings it up. It's not reality. And one of my biggest fears in this is it is part of there's an engineering behind this. Mm-hmm. Of decay of the agencies, so that they are less effective,
right?
So that they are more controlled. We see it in social engineering. Why not have it in the agencies that we are so dependent on as a society for our safety? So, one of those things that kind of comes up is, I look at leadership. Leadership is actually where it all starts to me.
Exactly.
Whether it's yourself, in your home, in your business, or in your agency. What I've seen on a corporate level, and I've observed as well in military and law enforcement, is, that not all of our leaders
need to be leaders.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
They haven't earned it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you come from that point, you have inept, issues. You are not built for that position, so you become protective about the position. Instead of bringing people up that have that leadership quality, that are there for the right reasons, you suppress those people and you surround yourself with more inept people that don't expose you for your failures.
Right.
That's something that I've seen in corporate structures. That's one thing when it's a business. But when we're talking about an agency that we as a public are depending on, that is terrifying.
Right.
And especially when we look at the effects that it has with this agency betrayal, with this moral injury, how that kind of trickles down. The people, the few that you get through that actually come in, like I'm sure yourself, you come in with some energy, you come in where you're like, hey, I can make a difference. I want to see this. I want to be the best that I can be. And then you just get beat,
hammered,
and beat. And beat. And eventually 10, 15 years in, you're like, man.
Yeah, those leaders may have looked good. Those bars, stars, and stripes may have looked good when you're taking your written and oral exam.
Right.
But what experience do you have to be a leader?
Right.
And, and then you go back to that betrayal. These officers are worried about their decisions on the street, so they're not going out and policing like they should. They're taking calls.
Right.
But they're worried about what's the backlash of
Are they
my
going to be
decision.
supportive?
Yeah. You hired me to be a professional. You put me through 26 weeks of training to be a professional. I've got 10 years on, a lot of these guards, but you're not letting them be competent in their decisions.
Right.
And you're coming in and backdooring them, and that's where they lose their value.
Yep. And that's where they're like, I can't risk this anymore.
Yeah. And so, some of them look at other agencies, some of them look at retirement, and you think, is the grass greener on the other side? No. But is it a little greener than what it is on our side?
Right.
Yeah. Do they invest in their people different? Do they have wellness plans set up different? Are they relatable? Because if I'm going to go sit down with a peer, that's been a referral from a supervisor, hey, we've got a problem with this guy, we don't know what it is. It's my job as a peer to get to the bottom of it. And the great thing is we have state law now that covers that peer. So unless they've done something criminally, they're homicidal or suicidal, what we talk about stays between him and I.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's important.
Yeah. It's very important.
Because, that trust, that relationship and that trust that it's going to stay in, because, we're still in that. I hope it's a transition point. I hope we're going to continue to advance in the mental health component of it. But that's carried such a stigma for the years. I mean, I'm involved with Coast Guard, carry, some mental health, medical, background for that as well. Right. There's things that you're just told you don't go to the doctor for. Right. You don't talk about. Right. You keep it off your record. And, because who knows what's going to happen now. It may be okay right now, but what happens down the road? So that...
Well, and that perception, like I said, when I was teaching this class last year, and to come out, the first 30 minutes is, hey, here's what happened at the Marshals Service. The last 30 minutes is, here's me having PTSD.
Right.
And trying to get people to recognize, and it's embarrassing. At first it was. Yeah. Until the end of the year, until I started getting the feedback. But to stand up and say, man, I had an outburst on my son. I'm blowing up at home. My wife, thank God, wrangled me in and said, your family is what's important. I don't know what's going on, but you're going to fix it. Right. You chose this career. It chose you. You are good at it. You're not going out like this. You have a year and a half left. You're going to get yourself right. But when I run into these young officers on the street now, it's not just my career they looked at, because I always thought, man, Jason, the action and the videos and the things you showed us, they were like, man, I realized my family's important.
Oh, yeah.
My faith is important. What you told me, the struggles, I need to get that off my chest.
Right.
I may tell my family the Disneyland version, but I need a peer that wasn't in that shooting with me or wasn't in that critical incident with me that can sound, that relates to me, that I can just be
straight
open
up
and honest. Yep.
You can lean on them.
Yeah.
You can lean on them. Well, we talked kind of about some of the bad apples, some of the challenges there, the perceptions. Let's talk about the good part about law enforcement. There's still a lot of good. It is one of the fields that I always admired. And as I became a father as well, and a protective father, just having grown up kind of a little on the rougher side of the tracks, I knew what was out there, and I knew what I was trying to protect my family from, and also prepare them for the reality of the world that is out there. But as a law enforcement officer, you are putting yourself out there every day. That's the ultimate, sacrificial job that I can see in wanting to not only protect the people you care about by being that frontline person, but also having the opportunity as an individual to make society better, safer, better, change policies. I mean, you're out there in it. It's as real as it gets.
For me, it was faith. It was, finding God. And that was here recently for me. And I found myself in the community in a different manner. I found myself being more relatable, wanting to have a conversation because, you think an officer at the end of the day, he's been to 20 calls. He's been to 20 fights, 20 disturbances, doing that. But I've been able to, and that's what I want people to see there. If you're really interested in law enforcement, it is such a great opportunity. And it's a true blessing to really get out when you care about your community, when you're working those same districts, to get out and have that contact. And we're seeing right now, you're seeing people come up and shake your hand and thank you again. Yeah, we have the protesters here and there.
Right.
But even I've had to arrest a couple of them, and you get them aside in jail, you're like, hey, thank you for treating me good. Thank you. And you're like, what were you yelling at me for then? Why'd you spit in my face?
Right.
But I
got a lot of followers out there right now.
I think it is. Are you paid? Are you just aggravated? Were you aggravated at something else and you just want to take it out on me?
Yeah.
But it's still that opportunity for good officers, good leadership to step in and make a difference in that community. Stop and take a picture with a kid.
Yeah.
You're a canine officer. If you got a good dog, take a moment, just have that positive interaction with the community. Yes.
And I love taking prejudices and prejudgments. And turn them on their ear. When you're able to take someone, they think they know you. They think they know what you stand for. They think they've got you all figured out and they're ready to attack you. And you bring a humanity that that throws them off. Then they listen. Oh, yeah. Then you get a little respect. Then you have that open door. And I imagine you see that with policing as well.
Yeah. Well, I've had, it's a shame when you're working with parents and on the fugitive side, you're looking for their child who's wanted for maybe murder. Okay. And this is a real story. I have this woman, she texts me every year. I arrested her son for murder. She said, you talk to me like a human being. You never disrespected me. And I hope you're a fan. She sends her blessings everywhere, even though I arrested her son. The thing I told her in the conversation is that I'm working for a family who's a victim that they lost their child. But you're a victim as well, because you have to take a chance that if your son is convicted or your daughter's convicted, they're going to spend the next 40 to 30 years in jail and you've lost your child. That's not what you wanted for your child.
Right.
So, and I think when you look at humanity like that, these parents aren't all bad. That's the last thing they wanted was their son or daughter convicted of a crime like that specifically. And to have to, you suffered a loss too. And I think when you can be open with people like that and understand that it's a loss on both sides, someone lost a life and you're losing your child, you didn't want it.
Yeah.
And when you reach people like that, I think that's where those bad apples start to kind of diminish a little bit.
Right. That's an amazing point of view that I think gets lost completely. Yeah. There's victims on both sides.
Yeah.
And in order to have that perspective, you've got to be pretty resilient in yourself.
Right.
And I know with my journey through life and what I've been through and my recent engagement with faith, how that has really played in. You've hit on it a little bit earlier. but how faith becomes a component in that resiliency, in that strength, in that perception, that you can get through being a stronger individual. Kind of like this, looking at both sides where it's not quite as obvious or society doesn't direct us that way. Having that benevolence and that understanding that goes beyond just your ABCs of your job. So I know you've had a little faith journey as well.
Yeah.
Where do you see that aligning both through, we can only carry so much, our family can only carry so much, so you're left at night open-eyed in bed wrestling.
Yeah.
How has this played into your ability to cope, work through these things? Where do you see it aligning?
Everybody, I believe everybody's got faith in something, and my faith is in Jesus Christ. And it really, I had to turn to him 100% because you can go through so much counseling. You can listen to your family so much, but you've got to have faith in something else, something bigger than you.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what it was. And in that, I think the greatest gift that was given to me was humility, and to go out and do my job with humility. Like you said, look at both sides. You're both victims. Last thing I want to do is have my son arrested for committing a crime, but I'm not going to keep him from you either. If you think he's a suspect, I've got to have that grace to bring him in because he deserves his punishment. I tell people a lot of time too, and you don't realize until you really bring God into the conversation, is when people say, well, the police lie to us all the time. They may, but I have a God that I'm not going to stand in judgment for because I lied to you today.
Right.
I'm telling you what needs to happen. Let's make this happen safely, and let the system hopefully work on our side, work on the victim side, work on your side.
Right.
And I think when you open up to people like that and they see a true heart in your policing, in your job, you can really make a difference. But again, when you talk about leadership and you talk about individuals, you have to be willing to change yourself.
Oh yeah. I think that's where it all starts. Yeah. We can't take care of other people till we take care of ourselves. And that sounds selfish. And in a way it is to some degree, but in the big picture, it's how it has to be.
If your home life's a wreck.
Otherwise you're a burden to everyone else.
I am taking my home life. If it's a wreck, I'm showing up with it at work.
Right. Yeah.
It's inescapable.
Well, I know with mine, I thought I was pretty well put together. I'd been through some adversity. I'd carried a lot of weight, and I had faith in a God. It was my God. It was my construct. I was comfortable with it. But until I accepted true faith, faith in Jesus Christ, faith in the supernatural, I didn't realize the burden that I was carrying emotionally, physically, everything. And I look back at how much more resilient I could have been through these difficult times, how much I leaned on my family and my friends.
Right.
And some of it was well-meaning. Some of it was I wasn't able to cope because I didn't have that peace in my life. And, the nights that you're up, those experiences, those memories that come back that you're wrestling with, being able to hand that over, accepting that humility that you can't solve everything.
Right.
There are things that are beyond our human capacity. And that's where faith comes into play. Right. Knowing there's a plan, knowing there's a purpose, knowing that you don't have to have the answers for everything.
Right.
Knowing that those answers will come if you submit and you give it up and you close your eyes and you put yourself at peace.
That's right.
The next day will come and you'll have a purpose. That's where it aligned for me. Right. And it's tough. It's not like it happened magically and it's not a challenge to get into that understanding, that mindset. But I just know how much difference it made. Other than having a child for the first time, it was the biggest life-changing event for me, was finally, truly accepting Jesus Christ in my life. Right. And that's part of the reason why we're here today talking.
Well, and that's why I think too, if you think about it, when you look back through the tribulations in your life, God had purpose for you. And look what you're doing now. You're giving back to the community.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so we go through things in our life without understanding God's got a plan, and he's going to get glory for it.
Right.
One way, when you break down and finally submit, there's a reason.
No, there is. And, the strength through humility, that is lost. Humility is something that carried, a connotation in my world.
Right.
Humility was weakness in a way.
Yeah.
You were seen as kind of soft. Not at all.
Yeah.
It is confidence.
Yeah.
And it is one of the most essential components to being a leader. Mm-hmm. It's relatable.
Right.
It's understanding. It's that mutual respect that you can give when you're a humble person. That doesn't mean you roll over.
Yeah, no, you're not
at all.
Down. No.
That means you approach things through a balanced lens.
That's right.
And, that's something that, again, challenge daily.
Yeah. Hey,
you're testing it.
You cannot escape it, but through grace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You cannot fully appreciate it without that faith component.
Exactly.
Because that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
When you submit, I didn't realize how much ego I was still carrying until I submitted, and that is what that is. That you have to be humble. You have to accept you are not the shit.
Yeah, well,
you don't.
Like we talk about that day, I joke with people all the time. God had to get my attention. Not only am I going to break your shoulder,
mm-hmm.
I'm going to make you sit down for a minute because he had a different direction.
Yeah.
A year and a half ago, I wouldn't have wanted to do your show. A year and a half ago, I wouldn't have wanted to been in wellness.
Mm-hmm.
I was lost in my own hell.
Yep.
But he had a reason.
Right. It is amazing to hear you say that, because some of us guys are a little hard-headed.
Yeah.
And God has to lean on us a little harder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He definitely leaned on me before I finally, and I think that, you look at, especially, you talk to the guys that have been on the inside for a while, and, a lot of them find Jesus. You kind of just, I always kind of threw that. I'm like, you're just into yourself, you're looking for an easy way out. You're going to get back on the outside and all that's going to go away. But it is God's way of touching us. Mm-hmm. It's God's way of forcing us to recognize. He can't, I say force. He leads you strongly.
Right.
You can still resist.
Yeah.
And in doing so, I just really see it as a definition of the fact that he has a purpose for us.
Yeah.
And he's pushing us that way. You still have to take it. You still have to run with it. But there is a reason for this. I wasn't looking for it.
Right.
At all.
Yeah.
I didn't want it.
But he opens doors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
and sometimes we don't see that. Like I said, it took me a year and a half, almost 2 years to realize.
Right.
He had another way out.
Yeah. But, and talking about the faith component, do you see that, or is that still kind of taboo in this whole wellness movement? Is it, because I know how strong I feel about it. I can see how strong and how much difference it made for you. Or is this being discussed?
It is being discussed. When I went to the peer support class, did a 40-hour class there, you have to give up and talk about something that truly affected you in your life. Mom was that shooting,
mm-hmm.
how it changed direction. I assume everybody in the room, they may be atheists. I just take them at whatever. But I'm not going to be afraid to boast about my God.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And to say my team is alive, because I had 3 guys come up with bullet holes in their shirts,
mm-hmm.
burn marks on their arms. God saved us that day.
Right.
So in that, you do hear people say, it was amazing to sit down with, these 20 other people and hear them say, when I get in the shower, that's my prayer time.
Yeah.
I'm alone from my kids. I'm away from my kids. Prayer time doesn't have to be just on your knees in your prayer closet. Mm-hmm. If you need a break, go take a break and get it in there. But you are hearing it more. I think people are we're seeing people turn back to God. Because they're not finding it anywhere else.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think that is, and that's a great point. I hadn't really explored this, but all of the chaos in society right now that we have, that is one anchor that people are starting to see.
Yeah.
And, in the past, it seems like society just kind of flowed along. Life was, I know each generation says, oh, the good old days, oh, the good old days, oh, the good old days. Well, we had some good old days. That's just, we look at it. And so it didn't force people in mass to these critical components of dealing with the day-to-day stresses. Right. And I think that people are seeing, at least they're opening the opportunity for faith in Christ in their life. Right. We're leading by example. It's going to take guys like us, right, that you might not expect to have that level of faith, because I saw it as a weakness again. Right. If somebody came to me and they started talking about Jesus and miracles and all this, I was like, okay, well, I'm glad you believe that, but I'm dealing with reality here, man.
But until you live it.
Yeah. But now, as I've gone through my journey and talking to more people, I'm like, okay, this is real. Yeah. This is a foundational part of how you can survive, how you can make it, how you not only survive, but how you thrive and how you lead.
Right. And for me, like I said, sitting down and having that, I was saved, but for God to sit, like I said, go through all the motions, not only did I realize, and I think people take it for granted, He's God. It's a privilege to pray to Him, and much less for Him to even hear us. Right. And yet He wants it. Yeah. He wants a family to that. And so in my burden, I did it as well, like anybody else would. Why, God? Why'd you do it with me? But I guarantee I'll never ask that question again. Right. How dare I question Him after the doors He's opened for me when I was, like I said, living in my hell. Exactly. He was still there.
Very powerful. And, it's, I truly, my heart breaks for the people that haven't experienced it yet, or are resistant to it. All I tell them is, I'm not going to beat you over the head with it. No. Open up. No. Just give it a chance.
But I'm not going to shy away from it either.
No, not going to, because it's going to take people standing up in leadership positions and telling them, hey, this is what gets me through the day. Yeah. This is how I'm able to deal with this. Yep. And especially in y'all's line of work, what you're dealing
These first responders across the board, for every one of them. Right.
Cool stuff. Cool stuff. I've enjoyed it. Well, right along with faith comes family. Yeah. You've hit on, the effects that families go through. I mean, they're I wouldn't say unwilling participants. All right. They know kind of what they're getting into, but that balance that you are bringing home a certain amount, you're giving up and sacrificing a certain amount. Right. You have to find, how do you disengage at the door and re-engage when you walk through it?
That's right.
What do you bring home? What burdens can your family handle, and what do you keep from them? Right. That's got to be a torturous, delicate thing. Yeah.
Well, my son, he's a sergeant in the military. And, I remember the conversation he had with me is, Dad, that's one fight you didn't come home with, not even a Disneyland version. Mm-hmm. And because I walked in, like I said, you go to your door, you're not going to walk in your house with muddy boots on, but my mind was muddy. Yeah. I was tactically trained, but my mind took a dump on me, and it's important for families to see things up front. That's what they don't want to do. Well, my husband's a cop. He can handle this. They're in law enforcement. He's seen worse than this. How dare I confront him? And it could be the simplest thing is coming home and your spouse sitting on the couch and having that 15 minutes, just say, I need to sit down for 15 minutes and have a drink. But that 15 minutes turns to 30 minutes, turns to 45 minutes. And that one drink becomes 6 and 7 every day. You should have intervened. Right. When you saw, but families need that support. Mm-hmm. I am my wife had to go through counseling in that she didn't go through someone who had first responder experience. So the woman in her eyes that she was talking to was like, I can't believe that they're letting your husband back on the streets. I can't believe that. PTSD wasn't gunfire. It wasn't, it was totally, it can be so many things to so many people. Right. It can be your childhood. But my wife finally understood and said, you wouldn't want nobody else on the street with you but him. And I don't think we need to talk anymore.
Right.
Because she knew she was listening to other, she was getting the information herself.
And then, she had lived it with you. Yeah.
And I was getting dialed in through wellness, coming home going, hey, I made a mistake. And God put it on her heart. He may not be getting through right now, even though he was, but I remember getting on the couch that day broken. And she said, you're going to fix your crap.
Yeah.
People look at you as a hero in your community. They see you as this guy who's done these amazing things. You will not leave that career broken like you are right now.
Right. You're going to.
Yeah. And so family is so important to stand up but ease into those battles. Just remember when they're coming home and you see blood on their clothes, their uniforms torn, they've been in a fight, they've been in a scuffle, or even worse, they've had to take a life that there's not one person I can think that woke up in the morning and thought, I'm going to kill somebody today. Not one officer. It just doesn't happen. It's the last thing you ever want to do.
You talk about a burden.
Yeah. And so it's important to families. I would tell the law enforcement out there, educate your spouses, put them into a podcast like this, put them into other first responders that they can listen to and understand, and give them the courage to say, hey, when you start seeing me fail, let me know.
Right.
And then that responder have that open heart of, that's what I did. I needed to see it.
Yeah. And it has to be that mutual understanding. Yeah. We can't expect, an average couple can't even agree on where to go eat, for dinner,
Yeah.
So, we can't expect our spouses, our children to understand everything.
Right.
And to do that, you're creating a dynamic that is impossible to overcome. There has to be a person within the person. You have to understand what the capacities are.
Right.
What do you talk to your buddies about? What do you talk to your family about? But I've always tried, I haven't always done it successfully, but I've tried to have my home as my safe zone. That's my refuge.
Yeah.
That's where we put the maximum protection in, emotionally and physically, everything.
Exactly.
Because if you don't have that in life, faith is hugely important, but that's you and God.
Yeah.
This is more. This is where it starts really adding up. You've got lives that you are nurturing in some cases,
right,
and you have a chance to change good and bad.
Yeah.
And that's where that extra responsibility comes on, and man, the dynamic of having to work through your problems and their problems and everybody's problems. But,
and what you're touching on there is fathers need to be fathers.
Yes.
It's time for dads to stand back up and take their position, whether you're in the relationship or not with the mom. It's time to step back into the position that you
signed up for.
Yeah, those kids need you.
It.
Yeah, you can change that child's life by being a dad.
For better or worse.
Responder or not.
Right. And that, it is that fact that when you take that action of having a child, you have that responsibility of rearing that child. And financial's one of it. But I know how important it was to me to have men in my life, especially my father, to look for that direction and how to operate,
right,
how to handle a situation, how not to handle a situation, what it meant to be that person. And guess what? It took sacrifice for those men to raise me.
Yep.
It wasn't all about what they wanted when they wanted it, and I was a byproduct of it. There were times where they had to sacrifice to make sure I was being led in the right direction.
That's right.
And that's what we're losing right now. Everything is about the individual.
Yep.
It's a selfishness, a self-absorbed importance. And, we see it's pervasive throughout. If we can't teach this next generation what we are as men and as women, where are we going?
Right. And that's what's so important is when we talk about first responders, to go out in your community, you may be the most enrichment that young person had.
Exactly.
Invest in them a minute. I've done it over and over. Made connections with great families. I'm not there to raise your kid. I'm not there to make him go to school, but let me put some enrichment in them.
Well, it just takes that open door.
Yeah.
And I talked to lots of guys from different backgrounds. One commonality that I've seen is every successful person that I know, especially the self-made guys, had one person in their life, at least one,
right,
that was that grounding, that guiding light, that person that took the extra initiative with them at a pivotal point in their life, in their development, that they said, that's what I need to shoot for.
That's my direction.
Yep. And so law enforcement, perfect opportunity. You're dealing with the kids that are most susceptible to it.
Yeah. And I grew up fatherless, and I knew when I was 18, I need to go in the military. I need discipline. And, I wish more kids would go start your life there. You will find a group of people that, when your buddy's willing to die for you, that's a big thing.
That's powerful.
It's powerful.
Very powerful. Very powerful. Well, we've kind of hit around it a little bit on the big picture. Okay. So, we've talked about some of the challenges, both socially and within the agencies with our law enforcement. We've talked about the diminishing of the recruits. We've talked about some of the failures in the leadership. We've talked about how society's view has kind of been contaminated against law enforcement. How does this play out for us as a society now? What direction are we heading? And, and in that, how do we fix it?
Right. I think if I could tell the generation today who's even thinking about it, do it. Take a chance and do it. Look at your morals and do they align with the laws that and step out on that faith. And we need good officers. We need good police officers. I've seen guys leave the agency and go be bankers and come back 2 years later and go, man, it wasn't it. Yeah. I bet. And you're like, you're not in it for the money.
Right. No.
You're not in it for the money. You're in it because you really want to make a difference. And I wish more young people are at the age that they would say, you know what, it's what I've wanted to do. I did it when I was young. I wanted to be a police officer growing up. I wanted to be a fireman, whatever. Take the chance and step into that position and take your morals with you and understand that people like me, there's tons of us out there. The nation's crawling with us. We want to help you.
Yeah.
I want you to come into this profession and retire like I am, healthy, happy, physically good. You know what I'm saying? Let us help you and guide you in that direction.
Right. Well, I think that's, as far as our future, it's going to take the experienced people to come in and guide. I see us as having a big gap. We had a big gap.
Yeah.
And it's time to take that back. And we kind of hit a critical point right now that I think is going to force those hands. It's a reality that can't continue to be kicked down the road. It's a truth that is right there in your face.
Yeah.
And it is such a critical component to a functional society. You got to have law enforcement.
Right.
It's
not going away.
Just, as street smart, savvy, whatever you want to call it, as I feel like I am. We were at the restaurant the other day, or actually it was yesterday. Had our first fight, in the parking lot, and they came grab me out of the kitchen. I'm running out there, expecting it to be two guys throwing down. Well, it was women fighting. But the first thing that I did before I walked through that front door, as I told them, I was like, call law enforcement right now. We have to have that and know that the people that are going to show up to take care of those situations are competent and confident and fair and smart. And the direction we're heading right now with recruitment creates desperation.
Yep.
What kind of society are we going to be if we cannot have a functional law enforcement. That's terrifying for me.
Yeah, we need to go back to having the cream of the crop.
Yes.
And that starts at your leaders down to your basic patrolmen and everything in between.
Mm-hmm. And have a supportive ladder up.
Yes.
Bring those people that want it. Encourage that. Don't diminish it.
Yeah.
Direct them, fine-tune them, sharpen them.
Yeah.
And give them that projection.
That's the thing. You see a lot of their careers, they don't continue their training. They don't continue their education. That some of them love just to be there doing that. And I in the office I work in, I'm like, hey, did you see there's advanced rifle training? You need to go. And I push them. You're going to be better. When that active school shooter happens, this is going to pay off.
Yeah.
Go to advanced pistol. Educate yourself. It's free. Your agency's paying for it. Take advantage of it. You can sit on the sideline.
All right.
Step up and be more.
Exactly.
And that's what we need. Like I said, it's investment.
Mm-hmm. And that's what it is, and it's not a quick fix.
No.
It's taken a long time for us to get to this point, and it's going to take a while to get back. But it's got to start with the individual knowing they're supported.
That's right.
They've got to know they're protected. They've got to have defined direction that is morally aligned with who they are.
That's right.
And we have to start letting our younger generations understand how they can benefit, how rewarding this can be. This isn't about, being a punching bag.
Right.
This isn't about being thrown up on TV and prosecuted. There is a lot of good that comes out of this.
Oh, yeah.
And, we have to start rebuilding that.
There are great rewards out of it.
Yeah. So, we could go on and on and on about this today. But, I guess in conclusion, I definitely want to love to have you back on some other, because like I said, we've got a lot of information we could cover. But, talking about yourself again, I know we've started off there and kind of worked our way around, but, what's the legacy?
Yeah.
What's your legacy?
I want to leave so that, like I said, they've invited me to come back and bring my experience part-time. So I've considered that. I volunteer at a local fire department. I feel like community is important. Mm-hmm. And through that, it's been a different lens as well. But what I want to leave behind with my guys as I meet with my peers, is just to look and say, Jason did a great job. If they just remember me being a good cop and that he was open and honest with us when he left, he poured his heart out. He showed us his mind. We thought he was this big, badass dude, and yet he was broken.
Yeah.
And we can be broken too and come out of it.
Exactly.
And still leave, that's a legacy I want to leave. Mm-hmm. You may be broken, but you can be put back together.
Yeah.
It's temporary. And that's what I want to leave on the table with these guys.
You can be strong and you can be vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And humility will, like you said, what a great gift.
Yes.
And if you would approach every day, that the peer I'm working with right now, I need you to get off that parking lot, have faith in yourself, get back to work.
Yeah.
I know you've seen some critical incidences, but get your faith back.
Yeah.
You're a good cop. Mm-hmm. Who cares about the news? You're going to see it. It's not going away. Be better.
And that's when you hit on you've got to take moments in your day, and it's not always predictable. You're not going down on your knees.
Right.
You're clearing your head.
Exactly.
You're talking to God, and you're moving forward. You've got to take those moments when they're available.
That's right.
But I see, that's one of the things I try to do in my day. It gives you that reset. It gives you that confidence, and it is extremely and extraordinarily important to kind of get your head right.
Yeah. And I'd love to see more old guards that are retired with that experience. They took that knowledge with them and left nothing on the table.
All right.
Look at be a volunteer to come back. Hey, if you offered me a wellness slot and said, hey, we can't pay you right now, I would do it because I know what broken is, what a broken mind, and it's temporary. And
it's therapy for you.
Yeah,
well.
it is.
It's a reciprocal
Today is a blessing for me to come in and get to share my story with you. People don't, you talk it out.
Yes.
The holding it in is done. We don't suppress that anymore.
Right.
I can't suppress sticking my finger in someone's neck trying to save their life when they got a bullet hole in it.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to get that off my chest. Those days are done.
Right. Well, it has to be addressed and it has to be protected. And everybody's a little different. And so it has to be dynamic as well. And all of these are building blocks, to an end goal. And I hope that.
Well, they always say it's like eating an elephant, one bite at a time.
One bite at a time.
Yeah, that's it. You'll
eventually get that tail.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna be a fat butt after it though.
Well, this is kind of going a little bit back, but it's something that I've been curious of. What is one of the biggest mistakes you see rookies come in with?
I wish it's investing in their future. They come in, they're offered these part-time jobs. They're making $60, $70 an hour, because these places like Apple, they'll pay them double the salary. And they're not putting money away. And you don't realize this career flies by. And I wish they would make more investments for their future, for their children. Trump started a great thing with this deal in July that you can open an account for your child. Do things like that, invest. He's talked about what that will look like when they're 18 and ready to go to college. But have that retirement. Say, I'm retiring at 53.
Right.
I'm going to have a good life. I made those right decisions, those investments.
Those little sacrifices up front. That
do
little
the little
discipline.
things, and be open-minded to it. That career is not there forever.
Right.
And you may not make it forever.
Well, I think that's an important, I've got a friend who I grew up with that was in pro ball, and, that is one of those things as well with those guys, those rookies coming in, making money for the first time in their life. It's not just about the psychological things that they're facing that, we've talked about, but it's about those old guys that have been there, done that, seen it play out, talking about the financial stuff,
right.
Because this is what ends up helping you on the back end. Yeah. Preparing financially takes a load off of you down the line, knowing that at least you've got that to fall back on.
Yeah, because I couldn't imagine being 65, 67, trying to retire out of what I've done for the last 26 years.
Yeah.
I mean, broken so many bones, you're just, I can't imagine going that long. And the mental side of that as well.
So you got to plan for it. And these young guys, they see it as a long way off.
And I want that four-wheeler right now. And I want the big deer stands.
And you got to have the guys like you and like me that have been through it, seen how fast that plays, and say, God, if you trust me, listen to me.
Yeah.
Let's start doing this. This is what I did, and this is how I did it.
Because it was invested in me a long time ago. If you can't live off your paycheck and you're starting to include those part-time jobs, you're out of control.
Right.
Get back in, live off what you make, and put some back. Invest in yourself.
Right.
Invest in your family.
Well, in wrapping all this together, you hope you never reach this point. And this is a big question that can go multiple directions. But a piece of advice for people, if you hit that bottom, when you feel like you've lost everything, I mean, how do you keep going on? I'm reminded the scripture when David's talking about walking through that valley of the shadow of death. Nobody ever said to quit walking. You got it. You know what I'm saying? Yep. You keep walking, you're going to hit that bottom. And sometimes we need to hit that bottom. What I took from my shooting that day is my team of all the warrants we served, how good and tactical we were vulnerable. Keep walking. Keep moving. Don't sit down. Yep. There's a light at the end of that tunnel. Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people, and that's human nature, you just want to give up. Yeah. You want to. It's easy to quit. Yeah. And that's a sad thing too. And let me throw this statistic out. When you look at suicide amongst officers, not to bring this down to the end, they're higher right now than they are officers killed in the line of duty. And that's a sad situation. It is. And that's why I want to see agencies come back and really start, we can have all the glam, but let's really invest in what our guys are seeing and what they're going through. And address it in bites. Yes. Don't let it build up to a catastrophic level. Yes. If that door is open from the get-go, and it's encouraged to walk through it as many times as you need to, then it becomes cultural. Then it becomes accepted. It's not the stigma that you've had to overcome or that I've seen my friends overcome. Or haven't overcome. A lot of them still haven't. And they're going to carry it.
I joke with everybody. I graduated to now I get to do virtual call-ins with my psychologist instead of showing up face to face. But it was, it was a progression. I had a family supporting me, saying, you better take that first step. Yeah. And like you said, once I did, though, it became cultural. It became normal. It felt good to go. Right. And now being involved in wellness, they actually encourage the wellness officers to have a psychologist once a month or a counselor that you go to, because you're not only taking on our problems now, we've got all these other issues, and we don't want to hit burnout. All right. Well, we just got to take care of our new people and keep them straight and give them the support that they need and the access that they need to everything. Training, mental health, it's peer support, the old guys like you that have been through it, done it. And, even down to the financial component of it, give them all of that, because, man, knowing that when you step through out of the academy, that you walk through that first day, you are going to be taken care of on more levels than one. Look, you have to strip that officer of his uniform, his gun and badge, or he or she, and realize they're a human being. Yes. Underneath that. Yeah. And then you'll have a connection with them the rest of their life. Right. See them as a human being first. And I think you build their confidence in themselves. That's going to play out with the public. Yep. It's going to give them that strength to deal with adverse situations. And whether that be, just people or their own head, or, and I truly believe that faith is a massive component of that as well. Hopefully we'll keep on this journey and see some improvement. It sounds like they're at least tuning into it now, and that's encouraging. So, well, brother, I appreciate your time. I enjoyed it. Yeah, this has been a good one. It's been a good one. Hopefully, we're giving some people some information they can bite on, research on, and and some direction in life. Yeah, don't be afraid to stand up for it. Yeah, keep walking. Yes, sir. Thank you, Jason. All right, yes, sir. Thank you.